All right, let's dive into something totally rad. We're taking a trip back to the 80s and 90s.
Oh, yeah.
But not in the way you might think. We're not hopping in a DeLorean.
Right.
We're diving deep into the comments section of a YouTube compilation of Canadian commercials from that era. You guys sent this in.
I love it.
And we're talking almost 100 comments here. It's like a time capsule of reactions to how advertising was done back then, how it's changed, and of course, a whole lot of nostalgia.
It's fascinating. You know, these comments give us a glimpse into not just the product, but how they resonated with viewers then and how those perceptions have shifted over time.
Yeah, and the first thing that really jumps out is this, like, tidal wave of nostalgia, right? People aren't just saying, oh, I remember that cereal.
Right.
It's like full-on emotional reactions. One commenter even said watching these was like finding old pictures.
Wow.
They didn't even know they had.
That's powerful. You know, that speaks to nostalgia being more than just memory. It's about reconnecting with a sense of self, maybe a simpler time, or even like a collective cultural identity that feels lost now.
And what's really interesting is that because these ads are specifically Canadian,
oh, right,
there's this whole extra layer of like insider knowledge for folks who grew up there.
Makes sense.
We've got people proudly proclaiming their Canadianness like, hey, I recognize every single one of these.
That's where you start to see advertising's role in shaping national identity. Think about it. They weren't just selling products, they were subtly reinforcing what it meant to be Canadian at the time.
Yeah.
You know, the values, the humor, even the landscapes shown. It all feeds into this shared cultural story.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, we've got an American commenter.
Oh, interesting.
Who says the experience is different yet the same, which makes you think, what transcends borders?
Yeah.
And what's uniquely Canadian about these ads?
That's a great point. It really highlights how advertising reflects broader social trends.
Right.
Like in the 80s, North America had a lot of shared cultural touchstones, so there's that familiarity, right? But the specific products, the actors, even the regulations around Canadian advertising at the time.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Would have created those unique distinctions that this commenter is picking up on.
For sure. Now, one thing that keeps popping up in the comments is how different these ads are.
Oh, yeah.
From what we see today. And people are not holding back.
No, they are not.
Modern ads are getting absolutely roasted. We've got ghetto garbage, irritating, lacking the professionalism and character of the 80s.
Right.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
I think it's interesting to think about why people are reacting so strongly.
Yeah.
Instead of just writing it off as people being grumpy, you know.
Yeah.
Back then, commercials were often longer. They could tell a bit of a story.
Yeah, they had time to breathe.
Right. There wasn't as much competition for attention, so you didn't need the hard sell as much.
Right.
And maybe there was a higher level of trust in what was being presented, too.
A lot of folks are pointing out that these vintage ads just tell about the product and be done with it.
Yeah. Simple, straightforward.
Right. They appreciate that simplicity, which feels like a world away from
totally different.
The hyper-produced sensory overload ads we get now.
I think that reflects how our whole media consumption has changed, you know?
Yeah.
Back then, you had a handful of TV channels. Commercials were just part of the experience.
Yeah, you couldn't skip them.
You couldn't just skip them.
Yeah.
Now we're bombarded with ads everywhere. We tune them out, so advertisers have to get more extreme.
Right.
And judging by these comments, it seems like that's backfiring a bit.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely this undercurrent of longing for simpler times in these comments. People talking about wishing they could go back to the 80s.
Yeah.
Like it was this lost golden age.
Nostalgia often romanticizes the past.
Does.
But it also tells us something about the present, you know?
Right.
That yearning for the 80s could reflect how disillusioned people are feeling now.
Yeah.
With things like technology moving too fast, economic anxieties.
Right.
The past, even if it's not totally accurate, it offers this sense of stability that's appealing.
It's comforting in a way.
Right.
And it's not all rose-tinted glasses either. One commenter points out
that's good.
The level of denial in the 80s around capitalism and consumption, calling it sickening in hindsight.
Right. A little bit of critical thinking sprinkled in.
Yeah. So there's some awareness there.
That's important. It reminds us that nostalgia is a feeling, not a historical analysis. But even that critique is valuable. It shows how our awareness of social issues has changed.
Yeah.
What we find acceptable in advertising evolves over time.
Okay, get ready for this, because this is where it gets meta.
Oh, I love meta.
Several people pointed out the irony of watching a YouTube video full of old ads while being constantly interrupted by modern ads.
Oh, the layers.
Right.
That's brilliant. It really shows how advertising is inescapable, no matter how hard we try. And it speaks to how platforms have evolved, too.
Right.
These commenters are actively seeking out those vintage ads.
They are?
They want that specific nostalgia. You couldn't do that in the 80s.
Makes you think about how this desire for curated nostalgia might influence future advertising.
Yeah.
Could we see a return to simpler approaches?
Possibly. Maybe brands will try to tap into that 80s feeling as consumers become more ad fatigued and savvy.
Right.
There's a demand for authenticity and transparency. Brands that can nail that, even through nostalgia, might find a more receptive audience.
Interesting. Now, aside from these big themes, some really specific comments stood out, like someone's convinced they spotted a young Keanu Reeves in a Coke ad.
Oh, that's classic internet sleuthing.
Right. Whether it's him or not, it shows how these commercials can spark these little obsessions, these attempts to connect with the past. And then there's a comment about the black 7-Up dude.
I don't know that one.
Right. Someone else remembers him but can't find anything online.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
That one comment opens up a whole discussion about representation in advertising.
Yeah.
Who was in those 80s ads?
Right.
How's that changed, and what does it say about Canadian society then versus now?
You're right. It's like each comment is this thread you can pull on, leading to all these fascinating topics.
So much to unpack.
We've got the psychology of nostalgia, the evolution of advertising, even the actors and products themselves.
It's amazing how much these commercials can reveal about us, then and now. This deep dive is just getting started. Back again for more of this 80s and 90s Canadian commercial deep dive.
Yeah, who knew these ads could spark so much conversation?
It's really something. One thing I noticed is how many people talked about actively seeking out these old ads on YouTube.
Yeah, like they're on a mission.
Some even said they skip the modern ads just to get to the good stuff.
It's like they want to control their advertising experience, create this bubble of curated nostalgia.
That's a really interesting point. It suggests a desire to filter out the noise and choose what messaging they're exposed to.
Exactly. It wasn't like that in the 80s. You couldn't fast forward through commercials.
Nope, you were stuck with whatever came on.
Now, with YouTube, you have the power to curate your media diet in a way.
Makes you wonder if brands are taking note of this trend.
Yeah, could we see a resurgence of those simpler, more authentic approaches?
Maybe. I mean, consumers are definitely becoming more discerning, more skeptical of traditional marketing.
Right. They're not falling for the same old tricks anymore.
Exactly. They're yearning for something genuine, something that resonates on a deeper level.
And those classic jingles and memorable characters seem to offer that sense of comfort.
Oh, absolutely. But it's not just about the surface level stuff.
Yeah, what do you mean?
A lot of those vintage ads tapped into deeper themes, community, family, shared experiences.
Right.
Those themes are still incredibly relevant today, maybe even more so in our increasingly fragmented world.
I think you're right. It all ties back to that longing for simpler times we were talking about.
It's not necessarily about the 80s specifically, but maybe a yearning for values or a way of life that feels lost.
Like a search for meaning in a world that can feel overwhelming at times.
Precisely. Nostalgia offers that sense of connection, even if it's to an idealized version of the past.
I'm really struck by how some of these comments went beyond those broad themes and got super specific.
Oh, the internet sleuths at work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For example, someone mentioned recognizing Jane Eastwood.
Oh, the Canadian actress.
Yep, in a Canon copier commercial. And another person claimed to have spotted Walter Ostanek, the polka musician, in an ad for CKCO-TV, that local Ontario station.
Wow, those are some deep cuts.
I know, right?
But it's amazing how these little details can add layers of meaning.
Like these personal connections to the commercials.
Exactly. Suddenly it's not just an ad for a copier, it's a piece of shared history.
And the Walter Ostanek comment, even if it's not true, speaks to those hyperlocal memories.
Right. Someone out there probably felt a jolt of recognition, like a secret handshake with their past.
And for our listeners, it's a reminder that even the tiniest details in these commercials can hold so much significance.
They're like little portals to a deeper understanding of the era, even if they seem trivial at first glance.
It's like each comment is a rabbit hole just waiting to be explored.
You could spend hours researching the actors, the products, the cultural context.
So much to unpack.
Exactly, and that's what makes this so fascinating. It's not just about passive viewing, it's about actively engaging with the material.
You know, we've covered nostalgia, advertising, glimpses of social change, but one aspect we haven't touched on yet is the economic side of these ads.
Oh, good point. The economic backdrop is crucial for understanding the messaging.
Right, like those commercials for Molson Ice and Pontiac.
Oh yeah, classic.
They weren't just selling beer and cars, they were selling a whole lifestyle.
Exactly. Molson Ice, the Canadian party scene, Pontiac, that image of freedom and success.
They tapped into the economic optimism of the 80s.
Which was a booming time for Canada, by the way. Lots of consumer confidence. Spending was up.
Makes sense why those brands were flourishing.
And if you look at the visuals, there's this emphasis on material possessions, leisure activities, that sense of living the good life.
The big contrast to the more minimalist, experience-focused marketing we see today.
Huge difference. Back then, it was all about abundance, showing off a little bit.
And those high production values played into that, too.
For sure. Big budgets, elaborate sets, it all projected an image of success and trustworthiness.
Wow, this deep dive has been eye-opening. I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
We've barely begun to unpack all the layers of meaning here.
So much more to uncover about these commercials and what they tell us about the past, present, and even the future of advertising.
Agreed. We've touched on nostalgia, media consumption, even a bit of economics.
It's all connected, this fascinating tapestry of cultural and historical significance.
And for our listeners, I hope they'll come away from this with a deeper understanding of the messages they encounter every day.
It's a reminder that advertising is more than just selling a product.
Absolutely. It reflects our values, our aspirations, even our anxieties.
By understanding the context of these commercials, we can gain a better understanding of ourselves and the world around us. All right, final part of our deep dive into these awesome 80s and 90s Canadian commercials.
We've covered a lot of ground already.
Nostalgia, the evolution of advertising.
Even some glimpses of social change.
But now we're focusing on the economics.
Ah, yes, the economic undercurrents of these ads.
Right, like last time we were talking about those big budgets, elaborate sets, those catchy jingles.
It's all connected to Canada's economic landscape at the time.
So those weren't just stylistic choices, it was a reflection of the economy.
Absolutely. The 80s and early 90s were boom years for Canada.
Oh.
Consumer confidence was high, interest rates were lower, the housing market was surging, people were spending.
So businesses had money to burn on advertising.
Exactly. And they weren't afraid to show it off.
So it was more than just selling products.
Right. It was about projecting an image of success, of abundance.
Like saying, hey, look how well we're doing.
Precisely. Like those Molson Ice and Pontiac ads.
Oh, yeah, they were selling a whole lifestyle.
More than just beer and cars.
Molson, the party scene, Pontiac, freedom, success.
They tapped right into that economic optimism of the era.
It's like they were selling a piece of the good times.
Exactly.
Oh.
And visually, there was that emphasis on material possessions, on leisure activities, that carefree indulgence.
More is more, right?
Exactly. A stark contrast to today's more minimalist marketing.
Totally different vibe.
Nowadays, we're in a different economic landscape.
Right, more uncertainty.
Inflation is up. There's a growing focus on sustainability and social responsibility.
Makes sense that advertising has shifted too.
Oh, absolutely. Consumers are way more discerning now.
Right, they care about values.
They want brands that align with their beliefs, not just flashy products.
So those 80s commercials might not resonate the same way today.
They might even seem out of touch.
Right, like get with the times.
Exactly. Consumers are bombarded with ads now. They've learned to filter out the noise.
They're looking for authenticity, for brands that get them.
And transparency is huge.
Makes you appreciate how much advertising has evolved.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening.
It really has. It's incredible how these commercials can tell us so much, not just about advertising, but about society and the economy.
They're like little time capsules.
For our listeners, I hope this has made you more aware of the messages you're seeing every day.
Take a closer look at the advertising around you.
What are they really selling?
What values are they promoting? How does the current economy play into it?
It's all food for thought, right?
Absolutely, because advertising is never just about the product.
It reflects our values, where we're at as a society.
So be a critical viewer. Think about the bigger picture.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive.
Time flies when you're analyzing commercials.
We went from nostalgia to advertising, evolution, to the economics behind it all.
It's been a blast.
Thanks for joining us on this journey of discovery.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the world around you.